I unfortunately could not be joined by my tech team, so I've given you this wonderful image of us all together when we commenced our project in April. They're a very exciting lab based at University in Barcelona, UPF, and I am London-based. And so it's been a fascinating cultural exchange talking about language and AI. Because we're such a new project, we only began in April and will commence in full in October, finishing in January. I'm going to present and talk to you today about some of the ideas and the questions, as well as the early stages of what we've achieved. And so this is very much still at the level of a proposition, but one that I feel extremely strongly about. To start at the fundamental, I'm going to summarize what it is the Amore team do in Barcelona. They are building an algorithm which they call Amore, which is a deep learning algorithm. This is a subset of artificial intelligence, and it operates in the way that they feed it terabytes of information in specific ways, in order that it can learn, through moving through this information, how to recognize the desired word, objects, concepts. This is so simple, and yet it has so much complexity backing it up. It is self-learning. And this is what intrigued me as an artist first coming to this group. In specific, the Amore lab is pitching their algorithm to study linguistic reference. And to give you an idea of some of the potential applications of this sort of project is our car's GPS. In essence, wouldn't it be amazing if we could ask our car, our GPS, do I turn left at this big tree or the next? Think about that. It's a very simple sentence. It's the kind of communication we have with each other, but almost never, on the face of it, very easily with a computer or an algorithm. And to give you a sense of what it takes to answer that, the GPS needs to recognize the physical objects in our world in real time, as well as to understand your words. What's a tree? What's big? When do you mean that tree is big versus that tree is big? In this photo, it looks like that tree is tiny, but in the real world, perhaps they are inverted. And so to illustrate this further, on the left, I've given you a visualization of the processes that a model a little bit like Amore might recognize a visual image. In this case, it's posing the question of, what is that strange thing about this high on a leash that's coming towards us? And in order to do that, the algorithm combines inputs, hundreds of inputs of things that might kind of look like it, mammals, dogs, from all different perspectives. Think of the wildest puppy videos you've seen, with the perspective distorted as the nose is up against the lens, trying to understand an essential dogness from that. It compares all of that to the object that's approaching, and it comes out with an analysis. In this case, it's a probabilistic analysis of how likely it's a dog versus a wolf. So this obviously is a lot simpler sounding than it is in reality. And it's compounded by the fact that for the Amore model in particular, language is the golden thing they are searching for. And as you can see from these images, the real world presents a vastly different, more complicated, and varied set of stimuli than that of our learning processes. This is like the difference between a child learning in the classroom and a child being set off on the street to solve complicated problems. For instance, only one of these three trees is likely to run out into the street, and only one of them is what we would recognize as a tree, though all three have very comparable tree aspects and could be recognized as such. And thus, the basic foundations that I'm meaning to impress with all this is that these are things that are very simple for us and take an incredible amount of sophistication to impress upon a developing artificial intelligence mind. It needs to understand identification, language, and 3D representations, and in doing so, it has its subjectivity. This stops being just a tool, and it starts to be something that has limited experiences and therefore values, and thus also a worldview of a kind. In my project, Blueprints for an Emergent Personality, I'm exploring just what a subjective worldview could mean for something like amore, and more than just mean, look like. I'm approaching this as an artist. Since starting in the machine age, especially in the 20th century, we've anthropomorphized the physical shell of these things we are developing, but they've been sort of separate. The internal world, the world view of these models has been largely inaccessible. We've treated it as a kind of black box. But what is art? The process of making art, if not a way to open a black box, to process those things that are intangible, subconscious, buried, troubling, whether they're societal or individual. And thus, I'm hoping to use visualizations and extrapolations based on my experience of a decade as being a practitioner making large images, such as the one there, in order to ask, through my art, how we can conceive personality as an inevitable byproduct of the linguistic learning process. If that sounds like a leap, let me break it down like this. When you see a baby learning, the baby has expectations. When it makes mistakes, it is often because that expectation has been met with a different reality than what it had been anticipating. And therefore, you have a view before and after of two different worldviews as they evolve. And thus, in those moments of mistakes, we can sense, learn, identify the worldview of something that cannot lie on a Freudian couch like we can and say, I have these horrible feelings about flying, and the psychologist can say, have you thought about your mother? It's an entirely different set of going about things. And so I'm combining visualizing some of these mistakes in order to get the parameters of the building blocks of what it means to have the worldview, sort of the data, as it were, in combination with documenting the people and places that feed the algorithm, in order to, as it were, bring to the surface the biases and values that not only remain from what we give it, but also would emerge as it learns itself, and in that way create a picture from the inside out. I'll do this in 3 stages. The first is what we've already started. It's building an archive of sketches. As I just said, these will be visualizations based on the mistakes that the model makes that I will then take to a consultant in child psychology, which is the second stage. But the first stage also involves documenting all the values that might be put in. An analysis will be done, and then, in a way, the fun part for me is an imaginative extrapolation using my empathy, as it were, my experience, to project what this thing might have as a self-consciousness through making images that are more like portraits, self-portraits. Think Frida Kahlo. So trying to use its data to project it into future, to understand what could be the pathology, what could be the tensions that this thing might grow into having as it looks back on its development. So as I said, we're just in stage 1. So I'm showing you here some of the sketchbook spreads from this stage. This is one part visual diary as I learn more about the vast and fascinating world of coding, robotics, deep learning. And it's one part studying the people who are coding Amore in great detail. What are the problems that preoccupy them? What interests them about this? How do they interact with each other? Where does this model, in a sense, locate it? Is it in their minds? Is it in their internet server? Is it in the space of the rooms that connect them? Can we think of ourselves as a giant circuit when we're in this environment? And sometimes this is just pretty straightforward, of documenting as one would any kind of witness, who the people are themselves, doing portraits, as well as drawing the rest of the city. And the result may look something like these. This is from a different series that I did on motherhood. And it's just to give you an idea of these large presentation drawings that are the end goal of my side of this project. And so I'm going to conclude with the thought that in the last 5 years, we've devoted a tremendous amount of energy, resources, computing power into artificial intelligence innovation. And although there are genuine questions of just how sophisticated AI can and should be, it is certain that it will be a tremendously important part of our lives very soon. And over the past years, we've also seen that the impact of these things, these models having values, has had. For instance, the British and American elections and the influence of algorithms that has come through that, as well as other things. And so, although others are looking into the ethics, I'm not looking into the ethics, as it were, of a tool that may be malfunctioning. I'm not looking for the human flaws that remain in this, but using my ability as an artist to crawl into its mind, if it has one, to understand it, and therefore to build a picture from the inside out of what self-consciousness might be like for this developing form of artificial intelligence. Thank you.